Hello and welcome back to the She Lives Purposefully podcast. My name is Megan Edmonds and I'm the host of this podcast, and I am so thankful that you are here. Today we are talking about anxiety, and this is something that I have struggled with. If you've listened to the podcast before, you know this, but if you're new here, maybe you don't. This is something I've definitely struggled with a ton. I think I've struggled with it longer than I previously realized. And it's something that I have been working through with the Lord a lot. And so I'm excited to dive into it with you and talking about how to conquer anxiety, how to bring anxiety to the Lord. And I don't want this to be an episode where it's like, all right, once you're done this episode, you're not going to have anxiety anymore. That's not the case. Anxiety, sometimes the Lord can free us from it instantly, and sometimes it's a long journey and one where we're just constantly having to depend on Him. So I don't want this to be that kind of episode. This is more just a chat about anxiety as Christians, so I hope it's an encouragement for you. Before we dive in, I do want to say that if you are not already an SLP Plus member, what are you doing? No, I'm just kidding. But for real, you can get all the episodes ad-free and early access as an SLP Plus member. So go ahead and check that out. The link is in the bio. You also get a bunch of other stuff with it, as along with the early access and ad-free. Oh my gosh, baby brain. But yeah, so go ahead and check that out in the bio. But I would love to dive into this with you. I am more and more running easily out of breath through different episodes. My baby is growing and I can definitely feel that pressure on my lungs for sure. We are so excited to meet him so soon. It's crazy because it's summer and he's coming in the summer. So I am so stoked for this, and just, he'll be here soon, which is crazy. And the maternity leave series, which I'll talk about more in future episodes, but that is starting up in a month, which I'm so stoked for as well. Seriously, you are going to love it. I think I'm personally really excited for it. So, and I have been blessed throughout creating episodes for it. And so I hope that you are encouraged and blessed through it as well. It's going to be really good. But okay, let's dive in to talking just about anxiety. So first, just practically as a Christian podcast, I want to dive into how to kind of combat anxiety from a biblical perspective, and just go straight Bible verses and references that I hope are an encouragement for you. They have been an encouragement for me, and I have it in my notes here. So I'm going to pull up my phone, just some different verses that I wanted to talk about. And it really is, as we're going to see, combating anxiety really helps us to trust Jesus more. And as we trust Jesus more, we have it less anxiety. And so a lot of these verses are going to kind of speak to that as well. But the biggest one that I do want to talk about is Philippians 4:6-8. This is a huge classic staple verse. And it wasn't until kind of recently, within the last year, that I realized, this is kind of an actual recipe for how to combat anxiety. And it says this, and I'm reading from, I believe this is the English Standard Version, which is my go-to version, the ESV version. But this is what it says. Again, this is Philippians 4:6-8. It says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about those things." I love that verse because, again, like I said, it's pretty much a recipe for anxiety. And I kind of just want to break it down really quickly with you here. The first thing that it says is, do not be anxious about anything. So that's kind of something that God is telling us to do. And I love that because I think it speaks to the fact that God actually does care about anxiety and almost validates it. He recognizes that oftentimes as humans, we are anxious. And that's not something that he is ill-equipped to handle. He addresses it head on, the writer, but inspired by God here, addresses anxiety head on. It's not something that God is running from or doesn't know how to tackle. He knows that this is something we struggle with. He has ways that he wants to meet us in those places. And this is something that he says about it. So be anxious for nothing. And this is what he says to do in kind of combating anxiety, or instead of anxiety. This is what we can do with our anxiety. In everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. So instead of harboring these things, thinking on these things, letting our minds flow and wander with the anxiety that we have, all the worries that we have, having that be bottled up inside of us, dwelling on it, sitting with it, wondering why we have it, all that stuff. Not to say that we can't tackle the root of it, all that, it can be really important. But this says, make with everything, in everything, not even just our anxieties, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, to make our requests known to God, to bring our requests before the Lord. And I think why that's so powerful is, one, because in the act of doing that and bringing the things we're anxious about or the things we're not anxious about before the Lord, we're acknowledging that these things are not in our hands, they're in God's hands. And two, in that acknowledgement, this is also like a process of actually casting those things off to him. It's kind of this very active, like casting our cares on him. By praying out those things, we are putting them at his feet, and we're saying, you know what, like, this is yours. And this was always in your control anyway, and not in my control, but like, I am bringing this to you. And I'm making all of my requests, all of my anxieties, in everything known to you, God. And two, it says with thanksgiving, which I think is really powerful too, to kind of train our minds to, take our thoughts captive and also bring in new thoughts of thanksgiving, of things that we can be thankful for, which is really powerful, which leads to the next part of that, which says first it says, in doing that, the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. It will do that. And just recently I was going through something where I was feeling very anxious, super anxious, tears, the whole shebang, just so much anxiety, and was struggling too, but was, making sure that I was like bringing those things before the Lord and praying over those things, and had a lot of people praying over those things with me. And I truly did feel like even in the middle of anxiety, not to say that things weren't hard or that I wasn't struggling with some fear, but even in the midst of everything going on, I had this crazy peace that I couldn't explain, because it felt kind of like improper to have, where it was an unpeaceful situation, but the Lord brought peace in the midst of it. And I think that speaks to this verse where it says we will have peace, which surpasses all understanding. And it's a peace of God, and it will guard your hearts and your minds, which again, I think is so beautiful in speaking to how much the Lord knows about anxiety, that it's not just this like always, sometimes we can write it off as irrational or this, that, but it's in our hearts and in our minds, and peace can guard our hearts and our minds, especially when it's the supernatural and surpassing all understanding peace of God. So in everything, bringing all our requests with thanksgiving to God. And then it also says this, which I think is very profound and kind of ties into this mindset of thanksgiving as well. It says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, commendable, if there is any excellence or anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And I think it speaks to really being able to recognize the things we're anxious about, the things that are in our brain, taking those thoughts captive, and instead choosing to pause that. We're casting them off at the feet of Jesus, as we just read. And we're not just leaving this gap here, this hole to fill with more anxieties, with new things. We are filling that with these things that are true, that are honorable, that are just, that are pure, that are lovely, and that are commendable, and that are excellent, and that are worthy of praise. We are filling our minds with those things. And we can do that, I think, in a different number of ways. Maybe it's with worship, maybe it's with sermons, maybe it's just writing down the list of things that line up with that list there, things in our lives, or truths about God or reassurances that line up with those things, and keeping those on the forefront of our minds. Maybe we're setting reminders on our phones. That's been something that has helped me so much. Whatever that may look like. Maybe it's a notes app in your phone that you keep going to, things that are true and lovely and just and pure and commendable, all of that, and things that we're thankful for too, so that when we cast off our anxieties, which is a active process. I don't want to diminish this like it's, can be like, oh, whatever, super easy. Sometimes it can be very hard to release that anxiety and give it to the Lord. And sometimes it might not mean that, oh, we're free of anxiety forever. Woohoo. Like we might still deal with different things, but it is an active and it can be a constant process of bringing all of requests to the Lord and then filling our minds instead with these good and true and lovely and pure things. So I just thought that passage was so great when it comes to anxiety. And then I also wanted to share some of these verses with you as well. So Psalm 73, verse 25 says this: He is all I have, and He is all that I need. How beautiful is that? He is all that I have, and He is all that I need in all of our anxiety. I think sometimes it can be fear of the future, fear of the present, of lack of something being taken from us, of just different things happening. And this verse reminds us that God is all that I have, really, truly. Everything else can be stripped away, but God is all that I have, and He is all that I actually need. Because sometimes we can say, if this is all I have, that can be scary. But when we know that's all we need, that's all that we really need, and that He is always going to be there for us, then that can be so peace-giving too. I love also in Isaiah 52:21, this is one of my favorite truths. It's also found in Exodus. And it says that He is before you and He is behind you. This is one of my favorite truths to combat anxiety with. This is something I think that is on one of the reminders on my phone. And it's just something that I talk about a lot too with other people going through different things. The Lord is with me. The Lord goes before me, and the Lord is also my rear guard. He is all around me. And so every anxiety that I have, the Lord goes before my whole life, and He already knows absolutely everything that I'm going to be going through, everything that's going to happen. He went through before me. He knows all of it, and He goes before me, leading the way, clearing the path. He has got it. And not only is He going before me, but He is with me in all of that, in everything that I go through, in all of the worst fears that I am having anxiety about for the future. If they were, God forbid, to happen, He is with me in all of that, and He has gone before me in all of that. And two, He is my rear guard, guarding me in all of it. I am never alone. I am never in uncharted territory. I am never defenseless in any situation, in all of my highest anxieties. And so it's such a beautiful truth to dwell on. At least it's one of my favorites personally. It's something that I repeat to myself all the time. But it's a beautiful truth to dwell on because I think it can help us, take these anxieties. And I remember a counselor telling me one time specifically how sometimes with anxiety, we see the worst case scenario and we don't imagine or know the other things that are going to be there in that scenario, the people who are going to be around there to help us, the fact that God is going to be with us, the fact that we still have purpose, any of the good, we completely obliterate that and we only see the bad thing. And here the Lord says, I go before you and I am with you. And also in Exodus, like I am your rear guard. And that is such a beautiful thing that we can put into every anxiety. If we're dwelling on the anxiety, like we can place that in there. Okay, I'm so anxious about this, but if this does happen, God has gone before me in it. God is with me in it, and God is guarding me in it. This is not uncharted territory for Him. He is not totally thrown off. He is not anxious. He is not freaking out. And that is such a peace in anxiety, at least for me. So I hope that it's helpful for you too. And then a last verse that I love here too. It's a whole passage, so I'm just going to summarize it, but it's Isaiah 30, verses 17 through 31. Again, I don't know if I mentioned the reference of the last one, but it's Isaiah 52, verse 21. But this one's Isaiah 30, verses 17 through 31. And summed up, it basically is saying that God does not disregard you and he has not forgotten you, which I think just lines up really beautifully with all that we're saying. It's not like he looked away and then your anxiety came to be reality. It's not that he's forgotten you. It's not that he's not paying attention to you. He is so involved in your life. He is in all of the nitty-gritty details. He is with you in it all. He has not disregarded you, and he has not forgotten about you. And sometimes it can feel not that way at all. To be honest, it can feel like he slipped up, that he fell asleep and then woke up and was like, oh, whoops, like this horrible thing just happened, like my bad, I guess now we have to deal with it. But that's not the case with the Lord. And I think speaking these truths over ourselves is so important, especially when we don't believe them, or we're, sometimes that's a reality we don't even recognize, like, oh, I don't actually know if I believe this right now. And speaking those truths over ourselves, and the Lord is going to show us how those things are true in this life, in the middle of maybe something we're going through, or how these things are going to be true in the anxieties that we have. So even if those anxieties happen, the things that we worry about, he has not forgotten us. He has not disregarded us. Those things that we worry about, we can trust that we have the Lord with us through it all. So I hope those verses are an encouragement to you. And now too, I would love to also talk about with you, just from my own experience, different things that have really specifically helped me. All of them, or most of them, I feel like also just very biblical, but not necessarily straight up Bible verses, but just things that I feel like the Lord has used to help me specifically in my own anxiety. And I hope that those things can help you too in combating anxiety, having less anxiety, and in trusting the Lord more. We have a couple episodes, I'm just thinking of this now too, on surrender and control. One just like me and you chatting, and also one with my friend Tara on as well. So I'm going to try to remember to link those episodes, but if I forget, message me and then I'll put them in the show notes. But also they're from, I believe it's like 2023 March era. And those are really good. And I think a big breakthrough I had with anxiety was recognizing that it was centered in a need for control over things that were going on in my life and things that I wanted to prevent, or just whatever it was, just having this need or feeling of need for control, which was really a lack of surrender to God. And so jumping off of that, one of the first mindsets that I would say has helped me a lot has been remembering to not necessarily put my trust in what I hope will happen, or a situation, or what I think God should do, but actually putting my trust in him himself, him as a being, him as a person, him as God, instead of what I think he should do for my situation. So I'm not putting my trust in, okay, like he wouldn't let this happen, because he might let it, because we live in a sinful world and bad things happen. Right now, like Satan is running a lot of the show. He's running it, and the Lord, is allowing people to make their own decisions and do their own things. And I guess a kind of vulnerable, honestly, I feels funny even sharing this, but vulnerable example is for so much of my childhood growing up, I would pray really specific prayers at night, like over safety, over everybody in my family, like everybody by name, and then every possible nightmare by name to happen, like that there would be no flooding, no this, no that, like very specific. And, just in case like I missed anything and the Lord like allowed one thing that I let slip through in my prayer to happen. So talk about lack of control and that fear there. And so really it was kind of putting my trust in, okay, like he won't let any of those things happen. And then something really tragic happened in our family. I've talked about it on the podcast before, but my grandmother was killed. She was murdered, and I remember just kind of being so thrown by the fact that God would allow something like that to happen, and not really having the answer, and really being thrown spiritually too in a number of different ways. But now looking back, being able to see like, okay, I had put my trust in him answering my prayers the way that I wanted, him doing exactly what I wanted, him keeping everybody safe and sound. I put my trust in the situation that, God would do. So it felt like I'm putting my trust in God, but really I'm putting my trust in him doing something specifically exactly how I envisioned it to be, instead of putting my trust in him himself. And that's such a big, important mindset shift, I believe, because again, we live in a fallen world and sin is rampant, which leads to a lot of awful things. We also live in a world where sickness and death are also rampant, and that's heartbreaking and really difficult. And so all of that to say is I can't put my trust in things going right necessarily, but I can put my trust in a God who will be with me through it all, a God who cares so deeply, a God who keeps me and who does not slumber when he does, as we know from the Psalms as well, a God who is with me in everything. And so I think, anyway, all that to say, it's an important mindset shift of, okay, I'm going to put my trust in God, not the situation or how I hope it'll turn out. I think can really be helpful with anxiety too, because our anxiety is rooted in a situation not working out how we hope it does. But if my trust is in God and not the situation, then, I can trust, all right, God is going to be there through it all, period. And that's that. I think another big, beautiful mindset shift when it comes to anxiety is remembering our hope, and that we do have an eternal hope, and that our future is a future of hope. Because again, anxiety gives us this tunnel vision of all the worst case things that could possibly happen. But we have a future of hope as Christians. After this life, we will be with God. We will rule and reign with Christ, which is so wild. There will be no more tears, no more sickness, no more death, all of that. We are going to be in perfection with Christ, in a perfect world where we are with God. And so, reunited with people that we love, and it's just beyond our comprehension of how good it will be. But I think it's important for us to remember that truth, that our hope is not, again, in our situations, in today, in this life at all. But our hope is in the eternal and being with God, and that our future is a future of hope. And that hope surpasses all of the anxieties that we could have, all of the things that we're fearful of. We have a hope that is greater than that, and that is more long lasting than that, and that is going to trump all of that. Another thing that has really helped me has been taking my thoughts captive. And we kind of talked about this before when we were diving into scripture specifically, but I think it's really just obviously important to do because it's the Bible, but it is so important to be able to pinpoint those anxieties and to stop them. And I forget where I read it, but it was a quote on Instagram. I don't know who posted it or what it was, but it just was kind of this reminder that we don't have to listen to every single thought that we have. And it sounds kind of obvious to say, like maybe half of you listening are like, no, duh, Meg. And the other half are like, oh my gosh, what? For me, it was kind of this revelation of, oh yeah, like all of my thoughts are not true. All of my thoughts are not valid, and I don't have to listen to them. I can take my thoughts captive. I can have control over my mind. That was also something in counseling that I was reminded of, which as Christians we have the ability to do, is to be in control of like the things that we say, that we think, that we feel, like all of that. I can be in control of my mind, and I can choose to take an anxiety captive. Whether I, in the moment can feel confused, should I be like anxious about this or not, I can pause it and take it captive and instead give it to the Lord and trust that, all right, if this is a thing that I need to worry about, like he's got it. I just cast that off to him. But otherwise I can take it captive and put pause on that and put that away. And again, fill my mind with new things. But taking thoughts captive has been really important for me, instead of letting my mind just continue in a spiral of thoughts that it can go down. Because it can, anxiety can go from one thing to another, to another, to 10 other things in like a matter of a second. And all of a sudden you're worrying about the worst possible things ever that started with a fear of, going to the post office or having anxiety about something small. And so I just think that that's really important, is to say, okay, why am I feeling fear about this? Learning, pinpointing certain things and taking them captive and giving those things to the Lord, or, journaling about them, diving into them, like, why am I feeling this way about this situation? And diving into that whole process with the Lord as well. 2, I just wanted to wrap up with a couple of notes from a Bible study that I was at recently. It is 2 different quotes here, and I just wanted to share them with you. I found them really encouraging, so I hope that you do too. And then after this, we will dive into our Dear Meg question. But these are 2 quotes regarding, anxiety that I hope are an encouragement to you. The first one says this: "The enemy operates in fear of the future, of man, and God says again, will you trust me? Will you rest in me? Will you lean not on your own understanding?" I love that quote because I feel like it really reminds us that fear and anxiety are not of the Lord at all. I think sometimes anxiety can trick us, at least it can trick me. I don't know if it's the same for you, but it can trick us or me into thinking, okay, like this is valid. I need to have this on my mind. Like this could even be of the Lord kind of idea, where this is a must to think about. And it's just a reminder that anxiety and fear are not of God. He calls us to peace. He calls us to not be anxious. So that's number 1. The enemy operates in fear. He operates in fear. And so if I'm allowing fear, and sometimes it's hard to combat. Again, I struggle with anxiety. I'm not saying it's a quick fix, 100% done, easy, over. But if we give ourselves to fear constantly, then we're allowing the enemy to operate in our hearts and in our minds. So the enemy operates in fear of the future, fear of man. And God says, this is in contrast to the enemy, God says, will you trust me? And will you rest in me? I think anxiety, again, it doesn't allow us to surrender or to trust, but it also doesn't allow us to rest. Our cortisol is through the roof. We're just always overwhelmed and overburdened because of anxiety. And so God says, will you rest in me? Will you trust me? Will you lean not on your own understanding? That's huge too, because anxiety also tells us like, okay, this is the only way that it is. Your mind has totally got it right. This is my understanding and I am running with it. Like, this is what's happening. This is why I'm afraid. I can't get this out of my mind. And all the fears surrounding this fear, like it is all that I can understand or fathom. And what else can I lean on except for what I know or what I think? And God says, will you lean not on your own understanding, but to trust in Him instead? Trust in His plans for the future in your life. Trust for His plans in the present in your life. Trust that He is with you. Trust that He is not going to let you stumble. Trust that He has got you. Trust that He has got everything else going on as well. And so, yeah, I just thought that was really great. I'm going to read that through one more time and then hop to the next quote. The enemy operates in fear of the future and fear of man. And God says, again, will you trust me? Will you rest in me? Will you lean not on your own understanding? This is another quote from somebody at the Bible study. And it says this: the battle is not yours, it's mine. Like speaking, as God. Let me fight your battles. The battle is not yours, it's mine. Let me fight your battles. Release the battle to God. Your fears are His to handle. You don't have to fear them. Your fears are His to handle. You don't have to fear them. How powerful is that quote? The battle is not yours, it's mine. Let me fight your battles. Release the battle to God. Your fears are His to handle. Don't fear them. I thought that was so powerful. I hope that was an encouragement for you and that it helped in just lessening anxiety, trusting the Lord more, and maybe even combating some anxiety as well. Again, I am not saying all of this from a place of somebody who's like, I can't believe you struggle with anxiety or any of that. I struggle with anxiety. It's something that I walk through, and all of these truths are things that I need to be reminded of myself as well. This will probably be an episode that I go back and listen to just for encouragement for my own anxiety and that. And so I hope, that this was an encouragement for you, from the straight biblical to the things that I, do in my own life as well. I hope that this helps, friend. Thank you so much for listening. But before we wrap up, of course, it is time for Dear Meg. But before we dive into Dear Meg, I just would like to say, if you have been encouraged by the She Lives Purposely podcast, for real, the best way that you can love on the podcast is to leave a review. 5 stars would be so awesome. And then 2, or I guess that's a rating. So you can leave that on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. You can, I guess, like the episode on YouTube. I don't really know if you can rate and review on YouTube, but you can subscribe and like the episode. And so subscribe. And then also on Apple Podcasts, you can leave an actual review of like your thoughts about the podcast, about episodes. And I read all of those, and I would be so honored if you would leave one. It seriously helps the podcast, one, to just be found by new people, and also like once it comes across the pages of people, to know what this podcast is about, if people actually like it, if it's encouraging, and so that would be really helpful, and is, again, one of the best ways to love on the podcast, aside from also just sharing it with your friends, and maybe it's your favorite group text, or maybe it's on social media. But I would so appreciate if you love the podcast, to love on the podcast in that way. All right, so now it is time for Dear Meg. And today's Dear Meg, I have the question on my phone here. It says, Dear Meg, hi. Do you have any encouragement for a girl who is engaged, getting married soon, so exciting, and doesn't really feel like she's biblically lived out the purpose of her singleness? Oh, that's a good question, and such a good thought. I would encourage you, one, is that I think so many of us pass through different seasons not having fully like lived out what we could have in those seasons. And the Lord does not expect perfection from us. He knows that we're human. He knows who we are. And I think this new season is a brand new opportunity for you to fully step into, like you said, biblically living out the purpose of this new season, and biblically living out this new season. If there are things in a past season that you feel like, I think sometimes we can feel like, oh, I just didn't live it fully. Or other times we can feel like, like I actually lived that season not great, and maybe full of sin or different things. That's something we can repent of. But the Lord loves to redeem and restore and make new things. So I think that's really important to remember, like that season, you're engaged right now, like that season has gone and it has passed. And I would encourage you, and I think the Lord calls us to do this, is, if there's things you need to repent of in that past season, to do that. But like, to look forward to what God has for you, instead of to regret or live in shame of things of the past. To say, like the Lord knows me. He knew my whole life before me. He knew how I was going to live that season out. He knows everything about me. And even though I feel disappointed maybe in myself right now, like He's not caught off guard, and He loves me so much, and He still has incredible plans and a purpose for my life. And He wants me to not feel like, okay, well, I didn't live out that season, so like I can't live out this new season in this new way. Like, no, like now I get to live this whole new season in a way that biblically honors the Lord and is full of intention and purpose and following what God has for me in the season of marriage, which is so exciting. It's such an exciting thing. Marriage is so awesome, and it is full of ways for us to live for God in that. It's full for us to biblically live out our lives in that way. I'm just trying to reread the question here to make sure I'm nailing exactly what you're asking, and to live out our purpose in this new season. So I would encourage you to, one, know that the Lord already knew exactly how you were going to live out that season. He's not caught off guard. And to let all shame be cast off. The Lord doesn't have shame for you at all. He has newness of life for you, and He wants to give you a life full of purpose And that totally applies to this season. So that would be my encouragement, is to know, like, you know what, number one, a lot of people, all of us, I think every single person doesn't fully live out different seasons the way that maybe we could have. Number two, yeah, like I do think it's hard, and sometimes that can come with a sense of regret for sure. But now that different seasons, number three, have gone and passed, to maybe, you know, it can be okay to learn from those things, or to encourage other women in those things. Like, listen, live this out this way, because being honest and vulnerable, like I didn't, and I wish that I did. I personally lived so much of my single life, like really just, my gosh, like so waiting for the next season. I just wanted to be married, you know, and just was so ready for that for a hot minute. And I, like, of course I look back and I wish that I wasn't so almost obsessed with it and just like wanting it and always thinking about it. Like, okay, I just want to be married. I just want to be married, and really embraced more of like my singlehood era. And there's things that I'm really glad that I did in my singleness era, and really glad that I handled a certain way and different things. But I think there, you know, is always going to be a little regret for different seasons, but to then, you know, be able to encourage women otherwise to do this because I didn't do this. And then to move forward in grace and know that the Lord has so much more for you ahead of you, and to not, you know, look back in shame or regret, but instead to look forward to all the potential and all the things that God has called you to in this season. That would be my encouragement for you. I hope that that's encouraging. I am so excited for you in this new season. Again, marriage is the absolute best, and I want you to feel so free walking into this season, knowing what a blessing it is, and that God has so much for you in this time and with this person, and to be able to just run into that season so freely and so excited about everything that the Lord is going to do in you, to take charge and run the race ahead of you, not looking back anymore. So I hope that that's encouraging. I'm stoked for you. Congratulations on your engagement and in getting married. So super exciting. And I just wishing for the best and praying the best for you. All right, friends, that is today's episode. I hope this was an encouragement for you, talking about anxiety, and too, like, wishing maybe past seasons looked differently. And there's so much more we could dive into, but I hope that that was a little bit encouraging in both of those topics as well. I love you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the She Lives Purposefully podcast. I'm excited to chat with you next week as well. Friends, live for Jesus and live purposefully. See you later.